Hi everybody, welcome back to the KMG Power Sports YouTube channel. My name is Knox.
And my name is Scott.
And today we're going to be working on this 200 ATV from RPS. It's been sitting up for a while, so we're going to see what it takes to get it running. Alrighty, so this unit has come in. It is a TK 200U model, 200cc four-wheeler. It has come in with concerns of a fuel leak, and it also has a no start condition. Turn the key on, it doesn't look like we have any power. Try to start it, starter button does absolutely nothing. So, first things first, we'll come back here, open the seat up, and check the battery. Using my handy little battery tester. Set for 200 cranking amps. We have 12.5 volts at 107 cranking amps, so this battery is good. Alright, so now we have determined that our battery is good, so we need to further diagnose to see what electrical issue we're having. We have removed the top rack plus this cover. This cover, all it does is snaps into place, and these two bolts line up right here, and it's bolted in from underneath, two 10mm nuts. So I've just installed a tester key. And now, as you can see, we do have our neutral light on, if it shows up on camera. Neutral light is on, so now we'll go ahead and test to see if it starts. Okay, so now we have determined that our key is bad, so we're going to go ahead and pop that guy in place, and then we also have a fuel leak to look at, so we will address that next. Alrighty, so the customer did mention that they do have a fuel leak, so we'll go ahead and turn the fuel valve on, which this one is the handle, or the lever is broken off of it, so use my pliers. Oh, and there we can see already we have gas overflowing out of the top vent, so that means that the fuel needle valve is not closing all the way, and it is allowing too much fuel to pour into the carburetor, causing it to overflow. So in order to remove these carburetors, you have a clamp here, and that just takes a Phillips head screw. This vacuum line is connected to the carburetor. It's probably easiest to pull it from here. And then also you have your fuel line down here. Make sure that your fuel valve is shut off. And then you have another clamp back here for the rear air boot. And coming around to this side, here you'll see your throttle cable linkage, and this will also need to be removed. So these carburetors do come with an automatic choke. So here you can see the wire for it, and typically you will end up tracing that back into this area, and you will have to cut a couple of zip ties to disconnect it. Alright, before we get into this thing, it should go without saying, always make sure that you wear your safety glasses before you start cutting, grinding, drilling, even using carb cleaner, or just working with gasoline in general. You do not want to get stuff in your eyes because it is not fun. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so now we have our carburetor off and on the workbench. We can go ahead and start disassembling and cleaning. So the first step will be to slot these 4 screws on the bottom, and there are also 2 on the top. Now you can do this a number of ways, which, as you can see, this has already been done for us. You could use something like a Dremel tool to get in here and cut them. You can also use a hacksaw, a file, pretty much anything that you have at your availability. For example, this is what they will look like whenever you first remove the carburetor. These are breakaway style screws to prevent people from tampering with the carburetor. So since these are already cut for us, we can just go ahead and dive right in. It's always nice to have a little tray or something like this. That way you can keep up with all your parts and make sure that nothing gets lost. Then we can remove our bowl. And the bowl doesn't look horrible. There is some green staining in it, which that usually doesn't cause too much of a problem. See, our gasket's a little worn down, but it should still seal up. I don't believe that's the reason why we are leaking. So now that we are looking at the main body, here we have our pilot jet or idle jet. This is what controls the fuel whenever the motor is only at idle speed. And then you have your main jet, which operates the fuel flow at 3/4 wide open throttle. And then you will have your slide down here with a needle, if you can see that in there. And this operates your throttle at around mid-range, half throttle or so. So let's go ahead and remove our pilot jet. They'll normally kind of like to stick in there a little bit, and so you just want to give them a little tap and then they will fall right out. And now what you want to look for is you want to see if you have light passing through the entirety of the jet. If you cannot see light coming through the jet, then you know it is clogged. And it looks like this one is clear. I'm not sure how well that shows up on camera, but we can definitely see light passing through. And just because we're here, I'm going to go ahead and take some carburetor cleaner and just give that a little shot and make sure that it's nice and clean. Go ahead and throw that in our parts bin. And now we can move on to the main jet. Now sometimes these main jets will come out with this piece, which is known as the emulsion tube. And if they come out in separate pieces, you still want to make sure that you remove this and make sure that everything in there is clean. Looking through the main jet, we can see that there is light passing through. Not sure if that's showing up on camera. We do have light passing through. Again, since we're here, go ahead and just spray through, make sure it's nice and clean. Another thing on these pilot jets is sometimes they can be very hard to unclog if they are clogged. And a good way to make sure that these are clean is to find a small stiff piece of wire, something like this, and just to run that through, give it a couple twists. And then if your wire is a little bit more straight, not like mine, then you'll normally see it pop out the other side and you know that the whole thing is clear. But this one wasn't clogged, so that was not necessary for this application. So let's go ahead and remove this emulsion tube. So now we can go ahead and remove our emulsion tube. For this you will need a 7mm wrench. Just like that. And now what we are looking for on the emulsion tube is to make sure that none of these holes are clogged, which it looks like, it might be hard to tell, but it looks like these two are clogged and this one closer to the top is maybe halfway clogged. Checking the other side, this side is clogged and the rest of these are okay. So we can go back and grab our small wire and just go ahead and poke these through. You can see the junk coming out of that one. We just want to make sure that we have everything nice and clean. Even though these holes are tiny, if they are clogged, your carburetor will not operate properly and you'll still have issues and you'll be right back in the same spot, taking apart your carburetor again, trying to figure out what it is that's going wrong with it. So now we'll just go ahead and plug one end here. Give it a spray through, make sure that they are flowing nice and well. Alrighty, and that takes care of our emulsion tube. So now that we know that our jets and emulsion tubes are all nice and clean, we're going to go ahead and move on to removing our float. And all it takes is this little pin sitting back here. Sometimes they can be kind of tricky to get a hold of. What a trick I like to use is just giving it a couple taps on the side, and you can see it starting to drive the pin out here. And then that gives me enough to grab onto just to slide this pin out so we can remove our float. Now this right here is going to be my main concern, is this float needle. We can go ahead and inspect our float itself. It's nice and hard, no cracks. It is looking to be in good shape. So, this one is looking pretty good. What we want to check for is to make sure that there is a nice point on the end of it. This is just a little rubber tip. And sometimes, if you can see this ring right here, they can get deformed and that can stop them from sealing, in which most cases it would need to be replaced. But this one's looking in pretty good shape, so I'm not too concerned about it. And then while we're here, we'll just go ahead and take a little bit of our carb cleaner, give it a little spray. Take something like a brush like this. You can find carb cleaning kits on Amazon for around $10, and they come with reams for reaming out your jets, and they come with these brushes and everything. A really great thing to have for just a couple dollars. What can happen with these needles is they will get corrosion and buildup from ethanol on the sides here, and that can cause them to stick, not shutting all the way inside of the valve, causing them to leak. So now we know that all that is nice and clean. We will go ahead and use some of our carb cleaner and blow it through our fuel inlet, going both ways, making sure there is no debris. Just in case there's any trash or any type of buildup, any deformities down here in the needle seat, what you can do is find a drill bit that is pretty close to the same size as your diameter. Doesn't have to be perfect, and just give it a couple little twists like so. And now if you can see down in here, that seat is nice and shiny. Might be kind of hard to see on camera, but now our seat is good and shiny, and so we don't have to worry about it not sealing up. Go ahead and spray this out again, just in case there's any metal shavings that might be stuck in there. Again, remembering eye protection, because you do not want to get bad gas or carb cleaner or anything like that in your eyes. Okay, so now that's pretty much got the bottom of our carburetor all taken care of. So now what we will do is go ahead and flip over here to our choke side. This just takes 2 Phillips head screws. We'll go ahead and pop those loose. And then just pull it off. Make sure this gasket stays in place. You do not want to lose that. So now that our choke is off, I'm just going to take our carb cleaner and blow it through all the orifices. Make sure that there is not any junk or anything in there that's going to stop the choke from operating properly. Okay, we'll take our brush, clean off all the exterior debris. And now our choke is good to go. So, flipping back over to the bottom, this tube right here, if you can see where this line runs down here, it goes into the choke of the carburetor. So what we want to do is, now that we have the choke off, we'll go ahead and use our carb cleaner. Do a nice spray through here, and I can see it coming out of the choke side. And we want to make sure that we do this both ways. Make sure that everything is nice and clean. Okay, and now that should have the bottom of our carburetor completed, as well as our choke side. So as for our next step is going to be to go ahead and remove this vacuum deacceleration pump. And to do that, we will first need to remove our throttle cable bracket. Again, just 2 Phillips head. Crack those loose. And now, again, 2 more Phillips head here for the deacceleration pump. Now, bear in mind there is a spring underneath here, so you do want to apply some pressure with your fingers just to make sure that it doesn't go flying off on you. Here's our spring. Now these normally don't get too dirty because these are on the air side of the carburetor, but while I'm here I always like to just go ahead and double check that everything is nice and clean, which it looks like it is. But since we're here, just go ahead and give it a little spray and make sure that it's all nice and clean. So now that has our bottom, vacuum pump, and our choke all taken care of, let's go ahead and move on to the top here. Again, these screws will need to be slotted, which these have already been done for us. And again, just like the vacuum pump, this does have a spring behind it, so you want to be careful of that. This guy's a little stuck. Normally just give it a couple taps with your screwdriver and it'll pop right off. A little bit of dirt in here, nothing too crazy. And this is also on the air side of the carburetor, so it really does not see fuel except for down here on the needle. This needle we want to make sure is nice and clean and does not have any built up ethanol residue or any gunk or anything like that. So, just like everything else, hit it with a little bit of carburetor cleaner. Take a little brush, just to make sure it is all nice and clean. We'll just go ahead and give our diaphragm a nice little wipe down, also inspecting it for any tears or holes or anything of that nature. It looks like we are pretty good. Now we'll go ahead and make sure everything else in here is clean. There are two small orifices here. Make sure you just blow a little bit of carb cleaner through those to make sure they are nice and clean. At this point, our carburetor is pretty much fully disassembled, at least as far as we need to go with it. And so we will just go through and make sure everything is nice and clean, give everything a good spray and a good little brushing, just to make sure that we are free of any debris. Make sure we get inside the venturi too, and all the way down to the back side of our butterfly valve. And always remember, on both sides of your venturi, you have these two little ports on either side, which some carburetors vary, but this one only has two, aside from the one in front of the butterfly. But you always want to make sure that you give these a good spray through, just to make sure that there are no clogs. Alright, so from this point, what you'll need to do is remove, there's a cap that goes over this idle mixture screw. And what it'll look like for you, it'll be this brass cap right here. And now you just want to take a little drill bit and drill that guy out. Sometimes you'll need to take a small screwdriver, or sometimes you can even use a screw like this. After you have your hole drilled, thread the screw in and then pull the whole plug out with a pair of pliers or something. And you want to remove this, one, for tuning ability, for tuning on your idle mixture. It does not tune the rest of the carburetor, it's only on the idle circuit, so only whenever the motor is at idle. So what we will do is take our screwdriver and we want to count our turns in before we remove it. So here we'll have half of a turn, one full turn, 1 1/2, 2, and it looks like it's right at 2. So now we can go ahead and remove this. And of course, make a note if you need to, just so you can remember how many turns out it is. A lot of the times you'll end up resetting these anyways. Our failsafe that we use is normally 2.5 turns out. Just go ahead and give that a tap. And you'll notice there's a small spring that sits on this needle. Make sure that you do not lose this piece. This is very important. Also, there's oftentimes a rubber seal down in here. It looks like this one does not have it. So now that we have this removed, same thing, a little bit of carb clean. Take a brush, make sure that it's free of debris, no ethanol gunk, and that is good to go. And now, as we blow through here, you can see that small orifice right in front of the valve is where that comes out at. So now we know that that is clean. So now we can begin reassembling, and basically the reverse process in which we took it apart. So we'll take our mixture screw, place that back in, grab our screwdriver. Now we're going to run it all the way in until it bottoms out. You don't need to do it tight, just until it stops. Okay, right there it stops. So now we will go half, 1 whole turn, 1 1/2, 2, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the fail-safe, 2.5 turns. And now you may be wondering how you count your turns. On a flat screw, what you will do is, if you only need to go half a turn, is you will turn it to where this end of the screw is now up here, and that is 1/2 of a turn. Let's go ahead and set that back to where we like it. And now we can start the reassembly process. Go ahead and take our slide. You see this little D-loop in the diaphragm, and that will fit into this slot right here. And sometimes the needle does not like to line up with the emulsion tube properly. And so you just want to watch it, and you might have to guide it with a screwdriver, use your finger to make sure that you guide the needle into the right place. Now that is set in, go ahead and turn our slide to where our diaphragm lines up with the rest of the carburetor. Just like that. Make sure everything's pressed in nicely, because you do not want there to be a gap where this guy is not sealed. Otherwise it will not function the way that it's supposed to. Go back with our spring, and again with our D shape, your top will have this point on one end, and that will go on the same side as your D loop. Go ahead and set this back on here, and now we can replace our screws. There we are. Now moving back over to our diaphragm side, go ahead and slide our tube back through the guide. And now first our diaphragm. This does not have a locating D-loop or anything like that. It just fits in like so. Now let's not forget our spring. Go ahead and compress it before we start our screws. These screws for the diaphragm will always have a lock washer. These are the only screws on the carburetor that do come with the lock washer. We will go ahead and get the first one tight. Now we don't have to worry about holding it while we replace our other screw. And now for our throttle guide. These take the fatter screws without the lock washer. And there we go. Now this side is done, so we can go ahead and flip over to our choke side. Cool. Place it just like that. And now these take the bigger screws with the lock washer. Make sure everything is nice and tight. So that's got our top, both of our sides done. And now back to the bottom. Just gonna go ahead, wet this down, go ahead and give it another scrub. Make sure everything's nice and clean. You want to make sure that your gasket surfaces are clean, otherwise it will not seal back up properly. So now this is nice and clean. Moving over to our bowl, we'll do the same thing. Just to try to get some of the staining out. And oftentimes this staining is really thick and deeply impregnated into the metal, and it will not come out, but I always like to try and give it a shot just to see if I can make it a little bit better. Again, it's not really going to affect the operation of the carburetor, but the cleaner the better. Alrighty, and I will call that good. So now we can go ahead and start replacing our parts. Starting with the float. Make sure you reinstall your float needle and then guide that back into place. Then taking our pin, sliding it back through both posts, and there we go. Now another thing too is to make sure that your float height is right. Now typically what you want to see is your float, if you line this line up here with a line on your carburetor, that's typically about where you want it set. And this one is a little bit low, so that could cause some overflowing issues. If it is farther up, it's not going to fill up with as much gas. If it's too far down, it'll overfill with gas, and you could start having overflow coming out of here, which could have also been one of our problems. So I'll go ahead and adjust this. And all you have to do is remove it and give this little tab just a slight bend, whichever way you're needing to go. There's just about perfect, so we know that we are good to go there. Next, we will reinstall our emulsion tube and tighten it down with our 7mm wrench. Doesn't have to be crazy tight. And now our main jet. Get it nice and snug. And then lastly, we have our pilot or idle jet. Alright, so that's got the bottom of our carburetor all complete. Now all that's left to do is reinstall our bowl using our 4 bottom screws. Go ahead and put these in and then tighten them down. I typically like to tighten mine in a cross pattern just to make sure that it seals up nicely. And there we are. Now our carburetor is cleaned and reassembled, and we are ready to go back onto the four-wheeler. Alright, so now that we got our carburetor all cleaned out and ready to go, let's go ahead and do the install. These are sometimes kind of a pain to reinstall, but hopefully this will go pretty easy for us. So first, what you want to do is get it into your intake manifold down here, because this boot is a lot more flexible than that manifold is, and so it'll make it a lot easier to get the boot on once you have have it installed in the manifold. Oftentimes it helps to get yourself a pry bar, give you a little bit more leverage to push it in. And on your intake manifold, you have locating tabs, 2 rubber tabs up here at the top, and there will be a small tab on the carburetor itself, and you want the tab from the carburetor to line up in between the 2 tabs on your manifold. Looks like we've got it. And then same for the intake boot. Helps get a little big screwdriver, a pry bar, be able to push that guy back on. These can be kind of tricky. Does take a little bit of patience. So I went ahead and got the air boot put back on off camera, just because it was kind of a pain and it was taking us a while. So what's next is this is going to be your drain line. It goes into the bottom down here. So next is going to be our fuel line, which goes in right here on the side of the carburetor. That guy pushed on. Slide your clamp into place. And now you have a second line coming off of the top of your carburetor up here. This one goes into your intake manifold that works off of vacuum pressure. Make sure that you do not get your fuel line and your vacuum line mixed up. Now next we have our choke cable, or choke wire I should say, and that plugs into this connector up here, just like that. Make sure that everything is zip tied back into place. And you want it tight, but not too tight to where it's going to smash and damage any of the wires. Snip off the end, and you're good to go. So that's going to be it for this side. We'll go ahead and turn our fuel back on. Now give it a second to fill up. And then we'll check to make sure that it does not leak. And I would say we are good. By now it would be overflowing the bowl. Alrighty, problem fixed. So now the next step is going to be to reinstall our throttle cable. Easiest way to do that is to go ahead and hook it into your throttle cam and wrap the cable around, and then pulling back, which will pull back on your cam, and then sliding your wire through. And oftentimes it might be hard to see, but these will have one side that are flat, and on here on your bracket it'll have one side that's flat, and so you'll want to line those up like so. Go ahead and run the nut on here. Before tightening, we'll check our tension. So this has gotten tight, so all you have to do is back off on your backing nut, get it to slide down a little more. Whenever you're adjusting for your tension, you want to be able to have a little bit of throttle pull, if you can see the cable moving, before it actually starts to move the cam. So we have just that little bit of slack right there, see the cable bouncing up and down, and then it moves the throttle. If you do it too tight, then you run into the chance of starting up your four-wheeler and it taking off on you before you're ready, because the throttle might already be open. And just go ahead and snug it up. And don't forget your little boot. And that is it for our carburetor installation. Now next, we will go and check the air filter. So in order to check your air filter, this right here is your air box coming off the back of your carburetor. You have 4 Phillips head screws that will remove this cover. So I'll go ahead and take those out. And I did go ahead and take loose the top bolt that holds the air box on, just so I can move it around a little better if needed. Alright, and there's our cover removed. So as you can see, there's almost no light passing through it. So I'm going to say we should go ahead and replace it. So this is your secondary screen, which will block out extra particles. This is metal, and so you can spray this out with carb cleaner, brake cleaner, something of that nature. These foam filters, if you try to spray these with any type of cleaner, they will expand and they basically get ruined. You can clean these out with compressed air, or if you have a can of like keyboard cleaner or whatever, those are pretty good for cleaning these out. But just make sure that you do not get any chemicals on it, because again, the foam will expand and they're pretty much ruined. Okay, so as you can see here, we have our new filter ready to go. We have our filter screen all cleaned up, nice and clear. And here you can see our old air filter, just so you can compare. Have lots of light shining through this one, and this one you can only see light coming through the hole. This filter was clogged, not going to be doing anything good for the motor. So whenever you're trying to install a new filter for one of these, you can go online and buy filter foam. This happens to be Uni brand. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick, and it comes in a big sheet, and you can cut out plenty of air filters that'll last you for probably the entirety of the bike's life. So it is also important to use something like this K&N air filter oil, or if you don't have access to that, you can use something just like WD-40. Anything that's going to lubricate the air filter to help trap in all the dirt and not let it flow into your motor. Okay, so now that we have our new air filter all ready to go, I went ahead and had to pull the air box out because the boot separated from the air box itself, and that also gave me a chance to clean it up a little bit better, get all the loose dirt that was in here, so that way it won't get sucked through our brand new clean air filter. So in order to fix this issue, all you really need is some type of glue. You can use either super glue or you can use hot glue. I think for this application I'm going to end up using both, because this boot has gotten a little hard over time, and I think that if it holds a little bit better, then it'll be less likely to pull out again in the future. So I'm just going to run a little bit of super glue along the seam here and just let it run down. Then just go ahead and push it back into place. It should snap in just like that. Now just give this a few minutes to dry, and then we will go in with some hot glue. Okay, so now our super glue has had plenty of time to dry, so now I'm just going to go in around the edges with some hot glue just to add some extra security, make sure that this thing is not going to come off again. So that's got our outside nice and glued up. Now we'll do the same thing but on the inside. Alrighty, that's got both sides nice and glued up. So we will just let that cool for a minute, and then I will bring y'all back for the install. Alright, so now that our glue is nice and dry, we'll go ahead and get everything all put back together. So, you have 2 slots, or 4 slots, in your air box. Your skinny one is going to be for your screen. It's going to slide in just like this. Just like that. And now our foam filter will slide in just like so. And now we have all this extra material up here. It's going to make sure that this is nice and sealed, not allow any extra dirt to make it past the filter and into the motor. and just reinstall the cover plate. And there we are. Nice, clean air filter and airbox. Now, go reinstall the four-wheeler. Got everything all put back together. I went ahead and heated up the boot to make it nice and soft, make it a little bit easier to go on. And I'll also add a little bit of grease in here just to help it slip on the carburetor just a little bit better. These can be a little tricky to feed in and out of here. It just takes a little bit of maneuvering and patience. Okay, so I went ahead and wiggled the boot on off camera. This boot is about 4 years old, and so it's gotten hard and it's really tricky to try to get on there. So now what we got to do is just tighten up our clamp, and then we can get the airbox itself bolted back up. And there we are. Now there are two bolts that hold the airbox in, one being up here on top. Alright, so got everything fully installed. I went ahead and did the airbox off camera because those are quite a pain sometimes, so I just went ahead and put that on off camera. It took me a little longer than I wanted, but everything should be ready to go, so let's see if it runs. Thing of beauty. So if you let your unit sit up, what will happen is the carburetor will get all types of gummed up and it's not ever going to run right, and in this case it was overflowing. So there's a good chance that it actually would have ran on its own, but we just went ahead and cleaned everything out to make sure that it wasn't going to be leaking fuel everywhere and all of that good stuff. So battery, carburetor, good to go. Thank you guys very much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.